I spent the last year in Colombia and I haven't made a single podcast episode about Colombia. Finally, I'm getting around to it. I'm also using this one to get back into social and political topics rather than only dog-focused ones. So, dear listener, or dear listeners, if you're still around in the plural, going forwards, we'll be back to mixing it up and talking about everything that matters to me, not only dogs. Today, I'm joined by my friend Sebastián de la Rosa-Carriazo. I want to talk about something we touched on in our very first conversation on a drive from Bogota to Boyacá. We talked about politics in general and anarchism more specifically. And my dogs, of course, were listening and contributing to the conversation as well. Anarchism as a topic seems relevant today because Colombia just had presidential elections and the far-right candidate Abelardo de la Espriella won. I'm curious about Sebastián's take on this. As a political scientist and historian, he's got a deeper understanding than I do. I'm hoping to get more friends on the podcast in the future too and see the world from their political perspective. It won't always be identical to my own perspective, but there's a reason we're friends, after all. There was a lot of background noise where Sebastián was recording, which made the audio less than ideal. I cut it down by about 2/3, but I want to share some of our conversation anyways. Welcome to the podcast, Sebastián. To get us started, tell us a little bit about yourself and the human and non-human animals in your life.
Caden, thank you very much for the invite. I live with my wife and with my cat. Cat is his name is Edward. He's a rescued cat. Often he makes one of the best parts of my days. That is a coming by my side in the bed when I'm just waking up. I also live with my wife, Nan. I'm currently living in Colombia. That's where I'm originally from, but I lived for 10 years in Belgium. I met Nan over there. 4 years ago, we moved into the three of us to Colombia. So we are now remaking our lives here in Bogota.
You were the first person I met when I moved to Colombia. And I don't remember how we got on the topic of anarchism, but in that very first car conversation we had, I do remember we talked about, about all kinds of things, but among other things, we talked about anarchism. Ever since then, I thought, I want to have you on my podcast. And now it's almost a year later. But finally, what does it mean to you to be an anarchist?
Rather than defining myself as an anarchist, I would say I believe in anarchism as an ideal. The idea that the humans, when they come together, can kind of make sort of networks and agree around a certain set of rules or laws. I went to university to do political science. It's called Government and International Relations. My school is much influenced by liberal law. There's a saying that is very common among professors and students there. No matter how perfect your legislation or your judges are, law is just trying to keep up with changes that people actually bring up. It's not so much that law is going to change society, it's just trying to adapt to changes that society is creating. My belief in anarchism would be much in that direction. As long as we need rules to be set on paper, to be institutional, it just means that we haven't been able to make the sort of agreements that would make a cohabitation possible without someone governing us. Anarchism would imply that this is not necessary, that we do not need a ruler or a government to be telling us what we are supposed to be doing, but that rather we are able to figure it out as naturally as we live in a society. I do think that in many instances that actually happens. Societies often bypass formal legal frameworks and just find a way to figure things out.
Do you think we are, in general, around the world, moving in a direction, like even if it's not a linear progression, that are we moving in a direction of more direct democracy rather than representative democracy? Is that what you picture when you say We figure it out without needing to be governed by someone.
That is the question where I try to still find out a good answer. Democracy is the power of the many, no? Demos and Crassus. But in the end, democracy is a way of governing us. That power, it's supposed to be taken somehow formally, to have a sovereign that has that power. And it is in there in which I am not sure if it is a democracy or rather a polyarchy in which different types of power are spread across society, decentralized. To answer your question, I am optimist. I do think that we are moving in general towards let's say, more fair societies. But it's not just a smooth slide. There's a lot of back and forth, and sometimes it can be shocking movements that we have in that back and forth.
How do you remain your optimism given that Abelardo de la Espriella just won the presidential elections in Colombia?
In that particular juncture with this just elected new president, my optimism would be driven by uncertainty. Will be more pragmatic, will be more dogmatic, still to be seen. Certainly, there are many words, many gestures from him that are extremely concerning. There are heroes that rise in the right moment. We all have complaints about the way things work, convictions that things should be done otherwise. But coming together, putting those convictions, those beliefs in motion is not an easy thing because we don't trust each other enough. Great leaders emerge when you know that there is that possibility to motion things in a different direction, but there is like a lack of a narrative that binds people together to actually go and fight for it. Sometimes you need crisis or difficult junctures to realize where those leaderships are. We're going to make mistakes, but we'll be able to at least shed a light on the right questions and in that make sure that people move things in the right direction, which honestly is because I'm optimistic. I do think most of us, we make choices expecting that it's going to make things better for everyone.
I remember you told me what percentage of people in Colombia vote based on ideology, or what percentage votes based on their own personal advantage. Would you remind me of that?
In the late 90s or early 2000s, they tried to understand how that very particular choice that is voting in an election is made. There were four motivators, each one a quarter. Personal interest or like feeling that you can't get something out of electing someone. Another one had to be more with an emotional connection with a speech, with a narrative. Another one had to do with belonging. You are part of a party, a movement, or an organization. Your identity as part of that group determines your choice. The fourth time is charisma. You just feel like you can trust this person. You are truly inspired that you truly become a believer that a project, a person can make a difference in your life.
Do you think all those four groups in the end vote because they believe their vote will make something better or the situation better for everyone?
Um, there are two categories that are a little bit more difficult to connect to that because both the emotional and the more charismatic driven votes, you would think that people are just imagining that this would be the best option. Then when it's more ideological, where because of belonging, these convictions in people, this would actually mean that, say, a better outcome for everyone. That is the most problematic, of course, the one that in which you just choose what is better for you. Yeah, that will be difficult to say that It is always thinking that what is better for you will be better for everyone. But in the end, you don't have all the options when you are actually going to an election. It is a limited number of choices. Sometimes you vote with your head, you make a rational choice. Sometimes you vote with your heart, sometimes you vote with your tummy. It's always a decision that you make in a given context in which you just have to choose out of the options available out there.
Yeah, that's true. I think if I understood you correctly before, you said you do believe as an optimist that all of us want generally for things to get quote unquote better for all of us.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that there's no selfishness or that there is no greed. Greed and selfishness are big motivators of human behavior. They push you to get things done. And there are choices that can hardly not be considered evil. We can be very complex when we have to relate to other people. We know that we produce harm, and yet we make that choice. There's always the possibility that even the person who makes the most horrible choices will, in certain scenarios, also be generous, be kind. There's power to like obtain benefits, but there's also power to make sure that there's a minimum type of conditions for everyone. The two coexist. It's a bit of a cartoon, but the angel and the devil will always be there telling you that which direction you should be going.
That's true. Yeah, that's a really good point. They probably have to always coexist and will coexist in any system because they're part of human nature, maybe.
Yeah, it's natural. It's human, but it is also prone to change. Is what I would pin my optimism to. It is always changing. I think we are still tending to being more fair, kinder, more loving people, but that doesn't mean that we don't quite often just go in the other direction and
Yeah.
react.
After listening to you now, I think if there's no reason for us to be greedy because our needs are being met, then less of us humans will be greedy. If the material reality does not make greediness, for example, a survival mechanism.
You go to agrarian societies that are fairly isolated from the intricacies of state power and where there's no police or army to be seen. You do have some organizations of the commons, for instance. There are merits for some to get better results from their harvests, but there are also random events that might harm some more than others. I think the aspiration to have it as good as any of your peers is not necessarily evil. Of course, where we are living in a global society where the levels of material well being are so unequal, you can only expect from the vast majority to really strive for getting closer to what they think is more fair. A little bit more difficult to understand is those who are extremely well off being so reluctant sometimes to just like making a small contribution or making like things a lot easier for others. There's levels of selfishness that are, yeah, we could talk about evil.
I mean, yeah, in our current society with those huge wealth inequalities, wanting to have more if you have very little, I would not call that greed. I would call that looking for justice rather, because I do feel it's
No
just not
way.
like it's an exploitative system a lot of time, right? I wouldn't even call that greed. If you are on the bottom of the food chain and you don't want to be there, that's very understandable and natural. And I don't want there to be a bottom of the food chain at all, right?
No, well, I, it's hard to really understand what that can actually mean when you haven't been there yourself. But it does create a whole state of mind in which you even come to question what is acceptable or not. Is within the acceptable is that you have to get it so much more difficult than almost anyone else that you see around you.
Yeah, that's not acceptable. I don't have it much more difficult than anyone else around me, but I don't think it is acceptable that there are people that have it much more difficult than me. That is not acceptable.
Yeah. Yet it's a challenge that we haven't been able to find temporary solutions for. There are, I think, some good instruments that we are just too shy to use.
Is there a main tool that you have in mind as you say that?
The idea of having what in Europe you would call a welfare state, but in general, any sort of public services, they exist almost everywhere to make life more bearable. And we know that good quality public services end up making things good not only for those who are the most in need, but for everyone. But there's quite often a distrust how fair the contributions are to those public systems, about whether someone is exploiting those systems for their own benefit. And that happens even within very legitimate, very transparent democracies.
Why do you think it is that I suppose it feels better to the individual person to donate to an organization and tell you about it than it would feel to them to not hide their money and pay all their taxes? Why do you think that is?
I think it's down to beliefs. Even the most rational of us, we just have this kind of mental shortcuts about what can work, what cannot. It's the only explanation that I can find sometimes because it can be grotesque sometimes, like when people are literally going out of their way to make sure that they pay less taxes. At the same time, are very generous, making donations.
Like even in Austria, that's definitely a thing. I feel like everyone tries to avoid all the taxes. I suspect, or the reason that I might avoid paying taxes is that I don't agree with the way the government is spending that money. If you have a welfare state, you have very little control over what happens with your taxes, right? Well, if you make a private donation to an organization that is providing anti-malaria medication to children under 14 or whatever, that is very, very specific. And you can like really direct your donation to that, I guess. Maybe that's also better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you have a very good point. I do think that plays a role now, and not to be controversial, but I do think that it's likely that even the shadiest governments are more transparent about how they use taxpayers' money than the most benevolent NGO or organization. But I think it's correct. People do feel like they have the capacity to make the right choices. They wear it as a badge. I am capable of doing this, so I will make the decision. I am not sure whether it might have to do with a narrative. The organizations are very good at advertising their causes. They will show you those who are most in need and how they get improved. Whereas if you think of the state, possibly like the first thing that will come to your mind is more the most annoying politicians, not the most positive examples. States or governments are not so good at creating their narratives for good purposes. I do believe that public services are indeed an excellent tool, but even in the better representative democracies, how you have to go through politicians to get those public services delivered is not very attractive.
Yeah. When we change the behavior of animals, such as in dog training, we're aware that the consequence of a behavior that I want to see more of has to be almost immediate, or the dog won't make the connection. So if you go through a representative, that delay is just too great to be emotionally felt for that person.
That's an excellent example. And then I had to think, of course, about bureaucracy. It is no a neutral noun, but when you say the word, you always will have like kind of a negative reaction of thinking like, oh yeah, this resistance to getting the things that I need get
Yeah.
done.
The image that I have now is like we pay to the government in taxes, as if you give it to one person in the end of a line that is 100 people long, and this person gives it to the next person in the line, the next person in the line, the next person in the line, and you can't even see the end of the line because it's foggy and the line goes around the corner. While when you give your money to an NGO, the NGO has like this mechanism of publicity, very illusion that you are handing your money directly to a starving child.
Absolutely. It is propagandistic for
Yeah.
sure. No matter how rational we are, in the end, as with dogs or with any other animal, because cats, and I have to think of a dog, it's exactly the same. By trial and error, like, hey, I want you to do this. And so, like, when you get it right, I will give you your reward. There's right away a change in the behavior. So I don't think that we humans are able to necessarily circumvent that.
We think we can think our ways out of this, but our brains are very similar. Our thought processes are more complex, but apart from that, they're very similar.
Yeah.
Let me bring this back to anarchism. How did you find that word for yourself?
When I first started thinking about this, it was through an exhibition on Biofilo Plaza. He was a late 19th, early 20th century character in Colombian politics. He was involved from the Mexican and the Russian revolutions through organizing peasants in Colombia. He was in jail over 60 times.
Wow.
In different places from Russia, Spain, Argentina, Cuba, the US, also in Colombia, often on charges of making explosives, creating chaos. So he went to jail for anarchism. He came on to realize, like, okay, well, this is the label that I want to go by. There's very little text that we know from Teofilo Plasma. It's not his real name. This is a pseudonym, but Teofilo, which is a lover of light, and Panclasta, which is the destructor of everything. In a series of letters with a Dominican socialist intellectual, he does acknowledge that in the end, he believes in anarchism as an ideal, and not as a practice. Some of the little texts that he has would not qualify it as political theory. It's a very human way of connecting with whoever reads it. To me, the ambiguity that he gives to that was what made me think of anarchism as a nice ideal, as he would say. This actually is a really nice ideal. The ideal that we can just, come and figure out things as we need to.
Nice. And did you at any point pursue collaborations with other people or political work in that aspect?
No, not really. I work with actors in the public administration work. I don't choose my collaborations upon ideological brand. Politicians are my clients, but they are not the purpose of what I do. I do people to make sure that whatever they have to do actually has the best outcome that I can think of for the people that I have to work with. But I don't care if I have to work with a politician that is an inspiring humanist or another one that it's very distasteful, as long as I can get them to deliver quality public services.
So, for example, you work with anyone and use them more as a conduit to improving public services for everyone.
I cannot be naive. I am the conduit. To sleep at night, but I tell myself, well, I didn't give the legitimacy to these people. I didn't elect them with I don't know how many thousand votes. In the end, people give them the legitimacy. They have a mission, they have a job to get done. I'll just help them thinking about those who should be benefiting the most from that service. Another feature would be to empower people to speak out. What is it that they need? It's too often the case that people feel like they are not going to be heard, so they don't speak out. I think you should try to speak out even when you don't feel like you are going to be heard. Your voice is pretty much the only thing that you have, so try to use it.
Thank you very much for the inspiration and for giving me some more food for thought. Before I let you go, where can people find you? Are there any services you offer you want to shout out?
I've been working in a small resource and support students on LinkedIn for anyone out there who is interested into political history. I'm going to be writing in Ciénaga DC, and I'll send you the link, monthly or bi-monthly little notes about political history center a lot in Latin America, but the idea is to precisely see how we mobilize, how we have reshaped democracy, how politics is also a grassroots work. And on that sort of line, several contents that I will be releasing it, always open for dialogue. Reactions would be much appreciated.
That's very cool. Oh, yes, please send me the link and I'll put it in the show notes. And I also want to sign up for it.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you for making time.
No, man, my pleasure. And thanks to you for inviting.
If you want to support this podcast and my ability to offer free and pay what you can lessons around Mexico City, the best way to do so is my Patreon at patreon.com/adventuredogs. I super appreciate your support. Also, rate and review on the podcast player of your choice. It makes a difference. Thank you.